Good evening. I hope you're all doing great. Today we're learning Maseches Nedarim, Daf Ayin Aleph, and as well Daf Ayin Beis. Don't be alarmed, but we are going to learn a little extra tonight. I'm not here for Shabbos, so 2 blot tonight, 2 blot tomorrow, and that will be through Shabbos' blot. And then in Mir Hashem, if my flights are all on time, then I will be back by for Sunday night Daf. I'll keep you posted if anything changes, of course. Starting at the top of Ayin Aleph, Amud Aleph, with a brand new Mishnah. Nadra hi arusa. If a woman makes a neder when she's an arusa, she's a na'ara me'urasa, and then niskarsha, she gets divorced bo bayom on that day, and nisarsa bo bayom, suitors are waiting at the door. She breaks off her engagement with the gerushin, it's an actual divorce, and then she remarries. Afilu lemeya, even if this happens multiple times, and it's engagement, divorce, all on the same day, the din is avia, her father, and ubayla ha'acharon mefir nedarah, the father and the last of all of the suitors, the last of all of the husbands, the two of them together are the ones who are going to be mefir nedarah. Just like we started in the Mishnah a couple of blot ago in the beginning of this parak of Na'ara Me'uras. The Mishnah then lays down the law. Zeh haklal. Here's the general rule. Kol shelo yatsa l'rishus atzma sha'achas. Any woman who hasn't been l'rishus atzma by herself, namely that her father hasn't died and that she isn't a bogeres. Those are the two cases that put her completely on her own. Then, if that's the case, that she's never been on her own, then aviha ubayla ha'achron mefir nedarah. That's when we apply this rule of the father and the final of all of the suitors, the final of all of the husbands on day one that she gets engaged to, halachically speaking, engaged of Erison. Then they are the ones who are mefir nedarah. Asks the Gemara, Minalan, from where do we know the arus achron mefir nedarim shenir la'arus rishon? How do we know that the latest of all of the fiancés, he's allowed to be made for a neder that began with the first arus, with the first of the husbands, right? So let's say you have Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zvulun. She got engaged to 5 different people, divorced, engaged, all in one day. Why one day? Because you can only be made for neder during the first day. So this all happened all within one day. So mehecha teisi that the guy who's the last one, who's now engaged to her, could say, remember Ruvain from 2 p.m.? I know it's 4 now. It's late in the afternoon. I can be made for those Nedarim. So says the Gemara, Minon, how do we know that? And the Gemara responds with a quote from Shmuel. Amar Shmuel, 6 lines down on Ayin Aleph. Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Vim hayos ish undareha aleha. That's what the pasuk says. If she will be with a man, and her nedarim will be on her. Nedarim shahayu aleha kvar. This is the drasha. So this husband, even with nedarim that were with her from before, that's how we know. Says Shmuel. That's how we know that the Baal Achron and the Av can be made for nedarim of the Na'ara Me'urasa, even though she's no longer engaged to the first guy. Engaged, broken off. She married number 2, or she's engaged to number 2. That number 2 husband can be made for the nedarim that were made by her during the time of Arus number 1. Says the Gemara, not so pasha. Dilma, perhaps, third of the way down on Ayin Aleph, perhaps Hani Mili Shalom Nir Arus Rishon. Maybe the only nedarim that the Arus Acharon is allowed to undo are ones that weren't made during the time of the engagement to Arus Rishon, but maybe in between spouses, maybe before she was ever engaged. Aval, but to say that nedarim sheniru la'arus Rishon, but maybe if it were to be a neder that was in the lifetime of the Arus Rishon, lo matzi made for Arus Achron, maybe the Arus Achron would not then have the right to be made for those nedarim. Says the Gemara, that's not correct. Aleha, based on the word undareha aleha, from the same pasuk, the word aleha is considered extraneous. That's kro yiserahu. And from there we learn that aviha and baal ha'achron, these two are able to be made for nedarim, even if the neder of the wife was made with the Arus Rishon. She made a neder with Ruvain, then they get halachically divorced. She gets engaged to Shimon, and the line keeps going. They get halachically divorced, married, however many, afilu lemeya. The Baal Achron, let's say Zvulun, many husbands down. Now they're halachically engaged. He can undo her nedarim even when she was engaged to Ruvain, which is a big chiddush. That's Shmuel's chiddush.
What age were you?
Na'ara Me'urasa. Yeah, Nadra v'hi arusa. It has to be that she's not a bogeres yet, because once she's a bogeres, the father loses reach. But it's all in a day. It's all in day one. All of it. It's a theoretical. Hashem should bless everyone. We should never hear of such cases. That's not normal. But it's a theoretical construct where the Torah is teaching us that He's just giving mashal. It's not exact. When we sold our house on Fitch, we had a buyer. It fell through that night. We had another buyer. Okay, just as a stam example. These things happen, not in marriage, hopefully, but these things do happen. So if the scenario would ever come up, the din is that mido raisa, the Baal Achron, can be made for the Nedarim of the Baal Rishon, which is a chiddush. That's a big chiddush. Because she was engaged to Ruvain, and Zvulun is undoing the Nedarim that were Beino Lebeino. It's a big chiddush. So that's Shmuel. That's a chiddush that Shmuel has here in the Gemara. And the Gemara says, I have two dots here. They don't really belong in the flow of the Gemara. The two dots, we treat them as Kodesh Kodashim. They're not Kodesh Kodashim. There were no two dots in the original manuscripts of the Gemara. This is something, it's an invention of our own. And in fact, here they don't belong, because it says the Gemara, Tanya Kava say the Shmuel, bring you a Raya Brura that Shmuel's right. The Shmuel's right in regards to what? Take a look at the Mefarish, 7 lines down. The Mefarish says, Dibra Masla Tanya Kava say the Shmuel, De'afilu ben Nedarim shenir la'aretz rishon mefer bal ha'achron. This idea that we were just articulating, that if Nedareha, if she makes a neder for the Aris Rishon for Ruvain, and then divorced and she gets engaged to Shimon, then Shimon can be made for the Nedarim that she made during the time of the Aris Rishon. And what's the Raya? Let's take a look at this Brisa. This Brisa takes us to the end of the page. The Brisa reads as follows. Na'ara ha'me'urasa, our girl, between 12 and 12 and a half, and she's engaged. Aviha ubaila mefirin nedareha. This din we saw earlier in the parak. That was the first line of the parak, basically, one of the first lines of the parak. Okay, that part's easy. Ketzad. Let's give some halachic examples of where this plays out, that aviha ubaila can be mefer nedareha. So the Gemara says 2/3 of the way down, Shama aviha v'haferla. Let's say the father hears her make a neder, and on the spot he's made for the neder. But the husband never heard the neder, and then he died. Vinis arsa bo bayom. So her husband died. She gets engaged to another man that day. Even if she were to get engaged, divorced many times over. That's our line. We haven't seen our chiddush yet, right? But well, it's hinted to. But next case within this brisa, Shama baila. Let's say her husband heard about her neder v'haferla. 5 lines from the bottom. Ayin aleph amud aleph. The husband heard her neder and he was mefer. Below hispi ka'av lishmoa. The father didn't get to hear the neder that she made at shemei sabal, and the husband died. A little different than our first case. Chozer ha'av u'mefer chelko shel bal. So then he can go back and he can be mefer. In other words, he can undo the neder even though the baal is dead. Doesn't matter. He can still undo the neder. Amar Rav Nasan, hein. That's correct. Because they both have to be alive when they're being made for neder together. So now that he died, what happens to his hafara? His hafara is only valid, the Baal's hafara is only valid with the Av. So we're stuck. Because that's the din, that's the drasha we just said at the top of the page. We saw the drasha on the beginning of Naram Rasa. We saw machlokas. Was a machlokas Tana Amoraim? Yeah, correct. I'm just trying to remember the Marimakom. The Marimakom was Amar Kravim Hayosi Eliish. Megas guys or Miklash Kalish. We're going to get into that on the top of the next page with a Gemara that I don't understand, and the Ran doesn't either. I mean, I looked at him like, I don't understand this. I'm sure other people do, and I just don't understand. The Ran's like Lo Hevanti. I'm like, okay, I feel so much better now. Very validated. So you're right, but here it's a chiddush, a shtickle chiddush, because the Baal did hafara before the father ever heard of it, and then the Baal died. So that's not avia and baila. That's not the same thing. Omar Rav Nasan, this shita hein divrei Beis Shammai. Abel Beis Hillel says Omrim no ein yachal lahafer. No, let's talk about this case because this is where we're going to see our right. The case starts 5 lines from the bottom. Shama baila v'hafer la. The case was where the husband heard of the case and did hafara, and then he died, and then the father found out. What does Beis Shammai hold? Chozer avu mefer chelko shel Baal. What does Beis Hillel hold? No, he cannot do it on his own. He needs the Baal acharon. He needs another husband to be able to do it. He needs both of them. And says the Gemara, "B'may pligi." What is it that they're arguing about? This brings us to the top of Ayin Aleph Amud Beis. What are they arguing about? Beis Shammai Savrei, they hold Nedarim Nami Sheroy La'aros Nisrok Nerushus La'av. Even a neder that was Roi La'arus, that was fitting for the Arus, gets thrown over to the father, Umegas Gayas. And there's a reduction in the neder by half. So says the Ran right here, 5 lines down. Lo hevanti divrei harishonim bazeh. Amai motzi mefer av lechudei lebeis Shammai damri megas gayis tfei mibeis Hillel damri miklash kalish. You're saying it like it's a chap. Oh, and Umega's guys. That's why this is stronger. And yet the next line in the Gemara says, Beis Hillel Savre, Aviu Bailachor Mefirna Dereg. We need both father and husband, and Velo Mega's guys. So the Ran is struggling, and if you look at the Ran, it's exceedingly long. It's about 40 very long lines of Ran. It's not hard to read, and there are some approaches in there. But the Gemara basically is saying this is the machlokas between the two of them, and this concluding shita of Beis Hillel, which is that in the case of the Baal who was Mefer, and then he died, and then the Av was able to again be Mefer, Beis Hillel says no, he can only do it with Yaros Acharon, which is that was Shmuel. That was the case of Shmuel. So that's a Raya Brura for the shita of Shmuel. All right, we're 4 lines down on Ayin Aleph Amud Beis. We're going to ask a question. All of Ayin Beis Amud Aleph is 3 attempts to answer that question, all of which will fail. So not to paint a rosy picture or anything like that, but we're going to ask a question and not really have an answer here. A question was asked in the Beis Medrash. Gerushin kishtika damya o ke'akama damya. A woman makes a neder and he hands her a get as a response. First of all, that's not very polite. And you probably should have a dialogue with your spouse. But he handed her a get in response to her making a neder. So says the Gemara. Do we say it's kishtika damya? He's mamish, it's just silence. It doesn't have any implications that he didn't say anything about the neder. Maybe he wanted to divorce her before the neder, and maybe the get has nothing to do with the neder. It's not worth getting in a fight. You're already holding the divorce papers. Just sign it. You would make a neder. So one option is kishtika damya. Oh, or perhaps ke'akama damya. When he gives her the document, when he gives her the get, it's really a kiyum because he didn't do hafara, and now he's saying, get away from me, we're done. And by definition, we're being Makayim the neder. Not yet. She made the neder already. She made the neder before she got the get. Is it a neder or is it not a neder? She makes a neder, I'm not going to eat any more Oreo cookies. And he walks over to her and hands her a get. Can she eat Oreo cookies or not? Tachlis. She has a neder, it's binding. If it's, what?
Yeah, it's binding. So his hand is bond. That's only that's changed. Right?
I don't understand.
No, in other words, his ability to be made for the neder is gone.
It's gone, but was he made for the neder?
No, made.
Was he or was he not made for the neder by giving her a get?
Come.
It's a machlokes. Kishtika damya.
And therefore he says nothing.
And therefore what? That's hafara.
So therefore, no, he just says nothing, it's nothing.
That's not right.
Right. But if he's making it, she's stuck.
L'may nafkamina. Let's just get into the Gemara painting the side. The Gemara is going to say both sides. Yeah, there you go. That's what you do when you don't know the answer to a question. You keep talking. You know. No. The Gemara is going to articulate both sides. Read on. Yes. L'may nafkamina. What's the difference between these two? The case is kegon shenadra v'shama baila. She makes a neder. Her husband hears about it. V'girsha. And then ve'ahadra b'yomein. He remarries her on the same day. Okay, this is a rough marriage. This is rough. My son asks me this question all the time in Gemara. These cases are so unreasonable. In Achanami, these cases don't happen, and if they do, it's all dysfunction. Pasha, that's not normal. But what we can learn is where the end of the halacha goes. How far does the neder go? Is giving a get hafara or is it not hafara? So says the Gemara, Iyamar mar kishti kadami. If you say that really you were silent and your silence was meaningless, then when you remarry matzi meferla, because you still haven't said anything, albeit you got divorced and remarried in the interim hours. So you're right, David. It doesn't literally mean hafara, but in this case, the nafkamina would be that if you get divorced and remarried, because it's still day one of the neder and he's still the Baal. So therefore, Gemara says maybe the shtika is so silent, it's so silent that when they remarry, he can still be made for the neder. O dilma, or perhaps be omar marka komadami. But if you say that it's as if you're supporting the neder, then lo matzi meferla when they remarry. That's what I got to read on. That's the crazy case, though. That's what the Gemara says. Oh, you could have thrown the father in here too.
This might not be Namaras.
This is not Namaras. This is it's one of the. We'll see this in the. We'll actually see this in the Gemara that this is talking about Benisu and Oskina. We'll see in the end of this Amud. We'll see it's actual full marriage. Otherwise, you're right. We'd be missing a character.
Marriage we spoke about could just be this.
100 Taka.
The father was made for. So would you say that he have to make for?
We're not talking about a father here. This is a full marriage. This is not Erusin, it's Kedushin. We didn't see that yet. I'm just foreshadowing. That's going to be at the end of Ayin Beis Amud. All right, 3 attempts to answer this question of whether or not a get being given right after a neder, whether or not that's considered kishtika or if it's considered kehakama. The Gemara says, top of Ayin Beis Amud Aleph, Tashma. When do we say that if the Baal dies, that the father can take over the responsibilities? That's bisman shelo shama habal. That's at a time when either the Baal never heard about the neder, o shama v'hafer, or he heard and he rejected the neder, o shama v'shasak, we have to pick up on this word, or he was silent, umeis bo bayom, and he died. So says the Gemara, v'i amris gerushin kishtika damo. If you want to tell me that getting divorced is as a reaction to a neder is kishtika, then lisni nami o shama v'girish. In this list, we should have seen shama v'girish. That would have made perfect sense. And me the lo tani hachi, and because we didn't see that in the brisa, so therefore shma mina gerushin k'akamadamu. And therefore, what that means, the Maisa, is that if the husband remarries her, he cannot be mefer, and therefore forget about the remarriage. It's k'akama. The neder is mekuyim. Even if they never remarry, it's still considered a valid neder, and she can't eat the Oreos anymore, for however long the period of Oreos is. Says the Gemara, that's a nice raya. That's a nice raya. You gave me a list of things that should not work. Shama v'shasak, right? So why didn't you include this case? The Gemara says you cannot use this argument because Ema Seifa, at the end of that brisa, we have the opposite implication of this one. How so? 10 lines down. Aval im shama v'kayam, if he heard and he fulfilled, meaning he was making the neder. O shama v'shasak, or if he heard and he was silent, to meis biyom shel acharav, and he died the next day. Ein yochel hafer. Hold on one second. If you're going to say that gerushin is like making the neder when he gives her a get right after she makes a neder, it's as if the get is mekuyam, it's as if the neder is mekuyam, then listening, then in the end of this price, that should have said, V'im shama v'girish. So the Reisha and the Seif of the Brisa from Maseches, from a couple of blot ago, have opposite implications. And let's remember the Shas rule. When you have one Mishnah with 2 parts and it has opposite implications from Reisha to Seifa, it means that we weren't meant to infer anything on this topic from that Mishnah. You want to make a diuk from the Reisha that maybe shtika is kehakama. You want to make a diuk from the Seifa that shtika is kehafara. Shtika is just regular shtika. Says the Gemara, nothing. What would we have argued? Reisha dafka. If the beginning of this was really the ikr, then I would have argued nasif Seifa mishum Reisha. I would have said the end only exists in its format of shama v'shasak because of the Reisha. And he Seifa dafka had the Sefer really been correct, and Nasi Reish Mishum Sefer, I could have wriggled out either way. So therefore, there's no raya from this Mishnah at all, because the implications of the Reisha and the Sefer in regards to the status of the Gerushin as it relates to Shtika V'Akama, they're opposite implications. Therefore, like Mishmamina, we're not able to learn anything from them. Toshma. Here's answer number 2, halfway down on 9 Beis Amud Aleph. We had said in our Mishnah, Nadra v'hi arusa, that was the beginning of Daf Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph, the Mishnah there. She makes a neder when she's in arusa, and then Vinis Garsha, she gets divorced. Vinis Arsa Bo Bayom, and she gets re-engaged. She was engaged to Ruvain, they got divorced. She got engaged to Shimon. She gets divorced from Shimon. She gets engaged to Levi. V'chule afilu meya avio baila achron mefir nedareha. We said that her father and the last of the suitors, the last of the husbands, are the ones who are involved in the hafaras nedarim. Shma mina. What do we see? Gerushin kishtika damu. How do we see this? Because she made a neder with arus number 1. Divorced, married. Divorced, married, divorced, married. And the Baal Acharon can do hafara on the nedarim that were made during the times of the arus rishon. Haraya, the gerushin is kishtika. How can you say the neder that she made with husband number 1 is being mufar by the husband who's husband number 10? Elamai, there's 9 gerushins between them. Elamai, the gerushin must be kishtika, and it's not kafara. Beautiful raya. Says the Gemara, no. What might we be dealing with over here? 2/3 of the way down, a little bit more. Maybe the first Baal never heard the neder in the first place. Says the Gemara, if the Baal Rishon never heard the first neder at all, then we don't only have one day to play with. Says the Gemara, if nobody ever heard the neder, there's no room for hafara. You don't have to worry about the one day. So why is it that our Mishnah only talks about one? Says the Gemara, the Mishnah only talks about one day because of anu kimta. What is the case that we're talking about? The Gemara explains 6-7 lines from the bottom. Oh, okay. The arus didn't hear, but the father did. And therefore, we only have 24 hours. The bo bayom hu matzi mefer. Only during that 24 hours can there be hafara. Aval mikan ve'elach lo matzi mefer. So therefore, the Gemara with this hacha b'maya skin with this ukimta gets out of answer number 2. We don't yet have an answer to our question. Do we say that the silence of handing a gerushin to a woman after a neder counts as silence, or does it count as akama? Let's try answer number 3. Tashma, 4 lines from the bottom. Nadra bo. She makes a neder, nadra bo bayom. She makes a neder on that day. Girsha v'hechazira bo bayom. They got divorced and remarried on the same day. Ein yachal lahafer. Oh, look at that. Ein yachal lahafer. If there's no hafara, shma mina gerushin ka'akamadam. It seems like the gerushin counted as a hakama of the neder because ein yachal lahafer. Beautiful. Says the Gemara. No, amre hacha benesua askina. This isn't a regular case of arusa. We're not talking about erusin at all. We're talking about a case of nesua, like I mentioned a couple of moments ago. But the reason why they're not allowed to be mefer isn't because gerushin. The gerushin is considered ke'akama. It's considered de'ein yochel hafer mishum de'ein habal mefer b'kodmen. Because once you're halachically married, fully married, you can't be mefer nedarim that were made with previous husbands. You're not allowed to do that. And that brings us to the top of Ayin Beis and Mud Beis. As we plow through the last Amud, we're going to stop at the top of Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph 3 lines down. Let's start with a new Mishnah. Derech Talmidei Chachamim. The Derech of Talmidei Chachamim is as follows. Ad shelo haisa bito yotza me'atzlo. When his daughter is engaged and about to leave the house, he says to her, Omer la, quote, Kol nedarim shenadart b'soch beisi harehin mufarin. He says, broad comment, all of the nedarim that you've made in my house, ladina harehin mufarin, all of them are dissolved. The husband who's a Talmid Chacham would also say the same thing. So before she enters fully into his house, Omer la kol nedarim shenadart acheloti kansi l'rishusi. All the nedarim that you made before, meaning during your erusin, all of the nedarim that you've made at that time, harehin mufarin. Because misha tikanes the rishuso eno yachal lahafer. Because once they're fully married, she can no longer undo nedarim that predated their marriage. Says the Gemara, Bam Kasha, Boy Romi Barchama. Baal, mahu sheyafer below shmiya. A Baal is allowed to be made for a neder that he never heard. Could you imagine you're about to get engaged? You say to your fiance, "I'm going to be made for all your nedarim, whether or not I know about them." Yes or no? Do I have to know about a neder to be made for the neder? We do this on Rosh Hashanah. We're like, anything that we know, we don't know because there's too many to remember. So we say, please just help us with everything. Mutar lach, mutar lach, mutar lach. But this is a little different. This is the neder. You're being made for the neder of a woman. You're being made for the neder of your fiance. Are you allowed to do that if you don't know what all of her nedarim are? Do we say? Arusa. Yeah, she's in between. She's in the in-between stage. So it's like Twilight Zone for her.
What right does he have it? No right, but it's a Rusa that he does have it.
This Twilight Zone, as we've been discussing, is that when she's a Nara Murasa, it's always father-husband with this dual responsibilities. It's Venn diagrams a little bit, like that middle space, she really is tethered to both. So it's some degree of shlita. But the Gemara is asking here a fundamental kasha, which applies to Hafaras Nedarim. When a husband is being made for a neder, does he have to know what Nedarim he's being made for?
Father-in-law also.
The Gemara doesn't ask about the father.
Could be the same question, though.
No,
There's a chance we'll know, but there's a good chance he doesn't know either.
I mean, we are going to talk about the husband in a minute, but yeah, let's wait because we're going to see in a minute that the husband's brought up. So what is the Gemara's question? The Shama Isha, that the husband heard, not Isha without a mapike, Isha with a mapike. Isha without a mapike means a woman. Isha mapike means her husband. Says the Gemara, do we say V'shama Isha dafkahu or lav dafkahu? Do we say that the language of V'shama he has to hear before he's mefer? Is that li'ikuva? Do we say that that's a fundamental requirement of hafara, that you have to be able to know what you're being mefer or not? On my Rava, let's bring a raya. Tashma, derech Talmidei Chachamim. Let's look at the Reisha. This is talking about the father. Says the Gemara. There too in the Reisha, B'halo Shama. There too, the father says, You're being made for the Nedarim, but he never heard the Nedarim. So you're right, the question applies broadly to both. Says the Gemara, the father didn't mean that he didn't know what they were. It's l'chishama hu de mefer. When he hears about it, he's going to be mefer. Says Gemara, well, im kain, if you have to wait to hear about it in order to be mefer, then im kain lo shama. If he hasn't heard yet, lama leila meimar. What's with all the funny language in the Mishnah? Before you leave my house, sweetheart, I just want to let you know that all the Nedarim, it's irrelevant if you don't know what the Nedarim are. So says the Gemara, a very important outlook. Hakamash malan, halfway down. Hakamash malan urche ditzurba me'rabanan lehadure. Yeah, you start a dialogue. Now listen, before you're on your own, I just want to make sure that all that we have done here in our house to raise you as a Bas Torah, that we did a good job. I don't want you to leave with any Nedarim. What Nedarim have you made over the last little tkufa? And fine, and they have to go through all of them. And she hopefully has a record. And then she can undo them. That's the right thing to do. So really, what the Gemara is saying is that when the Mishnah says derech tamidei chachamim to say that kol nadarim shenadar p'soch beis yarein mufarin, it's a dialogue. Sweetheart, tell me what nadarim you've made. Let's work together so that we can undo all of your nadarim. So that answer, that we don't really know now, because in the Reisha, the case we don't know about the Baal at least, but the Reisha teaches us that the father is not saying I don't know. The father's saying I do know. That's what I'm talking about. So we don't have an answer about the Baal yet. So Tashma, let's try again. And why doesn't the answer of the husband apply to the Baal? So let's see what the Gemara says. Tashmami Seifa. Maybe we can find a little bit more information in the Mishnah in regards to Rami Bar Chama's question of whether or not Vishama Isha is Dafka or Lav Dafka. Halfway down. V'chein Habal Ad Sheloti Kanis L'Rishuso Omer La V'chulei. He says to her, hey, before we get married, I just want to be made for all your Nedarim. Says the Gemara. Hachanami Da Amar La L'Chishamana. Says the Gemara. There too, we were only talking about a case where he knew what was going on. But no raya to say that B'shama Isha isn't le'ikuva. He heard, he knows. Says the Gemara, answer number 3. Tashma, let's try again. Ha'omer li'ishto. If a man says to his wife, Kol nedarim she'teduri ad she'avo mimakom ploni harein kayamin. A man says to his wife, all the nedarim that you make until I come from place X where I'm traveling, harein kayamin. You make a neder while I'm gone, it works. So says the Gemara, lo maklum, that's a 0. You can't say in advance of the Nedarim. You have to know what the Nedarim are before you respond. Hi, what if you say harehin mufarin? That they all don't count. So this is crazy. Rabbi Eliezer Omer mufar. But how does that work, Lamaisa? The halo shama. It's January 1. The husband says, I'm going out of town for a week. Any Nedarim that you make while I'm gone, they're mufar. And he says that they count? Why? That doesn't make any. He says that the comment counts of being mufar, that the Nedarim are all mufar. That doesn't make sense. Says the Gemara, no, hachanami, the Amar, l'chishamana, only when I hear about them, when I return. Okay, but v'lama limin hashta, why are you talking right now? L'chishama, leferlo, when you get back and you hear about your wife's Nedarim, mufar. What's the pre-gaming comment? It doesn't help at all until you hear about it. Says the Gemara, kasara dilma mitridna hahishaita. The Gemara says that, it's very taxing to go on a trip. You're going to come home. You're discombobulated. So here's the fascinating. The Gemara says, if you make the pregame comment of all the Nedarim that you are about to make this week are mufar, and then he simply hears about them when he gets back and doesn't say a word, they're mufar. That's what's implied from the Gemara. No?
I thought that he was the wife was about him.
The wife did. He got home and she's going to say, I made the following 10 Nedarim. They're automatically mufar the second he hears about them. But he doesn't have to say a new comment. Now, that's the Gemara's Shak Levataria.
The clock begins to tick as soon as he hears, and retroactively.
0. Correct.
Very strange.
The neder that she made was a 0.
Very strange.
He leaves town on January 1st with the...
4 months, she has to work on the assumption it's not retroactive back to January 1st.
Sure it is. That was what he said. January 1st. I'm going to say any Nedarim you make while I'm out of town are mufar. Now, they're not mufar until he hears about them. But when he comes home and hears about them, they all were 0s from the beginning.
She probably
So
has
she
to.
has to be strict on herself until she comes back.
Presumably.
Really?
Actually, I don't even know why that's true. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Because it's.
I thought that it's made for at that point in time, 4 months later, not retroactive back to January 1st.
Well.
Don't know. language of the Ran here. I'm just not sure if the Dibur Maskal lines up. V'neder batal me'elav kshish me'enu. That doesn't sound like retroactive to me.
Even the noter, he wants to ensure that the revocation will take effect when he hears about the vows upon his return. It doesn't say.
Not saying retroactive.
It's not saying.
Lo yodea. Okay, don't know. So but that is the flow of events. January 1, he says, any Nedarim you make, they're mufar. He goes on vacation. When he comes back, she says, here's the list of Nedarim. They instantly dissolve. Retroactive, we don't know. Toshma, let's try answer number 4, because we still don't have an answer yet. This one's going to take us to the end of the day. Toshma, ha'omer la'aputropis. A man says to the guardian of his property, Kol Nedarim shenoderes ishti mikan v'acha avo mimakom ploni hafer. He says, I'm using it as a shliach. Any Nedarim that my wife makes, I'm making you the shliach to be mefer her Nedarim. The hefer lo antaka, he did that. Can you have shlichus by hafara? So says the Gemara, Yachal Yehu Mufarin, first of the long lines, 5 lines from the bottom. You might have thought that maybe there is shlichus by hafara, that the apotropos can be mefer the neder of my wife when I'm out of town and she makes nedarim. Talmud lomar ishah yekimenu v'ishah yeferenu divrei Rabbi Yoshia. Chiddush. The Torah is mechadesh that it's only isha, it's only her husband who can be mefer nedarim. Afal pi that throughout all of Shas we know that shlucho shel adam kamoso, bris milah, all the time. Shlucho shel adam kamoso. He doesn't know what he's doing, so they hire me or somebody else who knows what they're doing. Good, shlichus. Not here. Chiddush. That's Rav Yoshia. Amar lo Rabbi Yonasan matzinu b'chol Torah kula shlucho shel adam kamoso. Why are you uprooting the classical rules of Torah? Says the Gemara. He's saying only because of the Gzer Sakasav. Okay. Now, according to the Shita of Reb Yonasan, who says that regular shlichus works, let's assume that it works. I am the Baal. You are the apotropos. The wife makes a neder. You're there. You say hafara. You're my shliach. So how does that hafara work? I'm gone. I have to know. If I'm the Baal and you're the apotropos and my wife makes a neder, I'm out of town. She makes a neder, no Oreos today. You say as the apotropos, batel, mufar, you're fine. That should not work. Because shlucho shel adam is only kimoso. And the Baal doesn't know about the neder. So how could you have shlichus if the Baal doesn't know about the neder? There is no shlucho shel adam kimoso. It's a 0. L'dugma, let's say that a father is out of town and he doesn't know that he had a child. 8th day. Where does the shlichus come from for the multitude of bris? It's not the father. He doesn't even know he had a baby. What kind of shlichus is that? So the chora and lamdus, it's bezdin. Fine, but it's not shlichus. I'm guessing, I'm projecting, but a similar idea would be over here. You can tell me shluchos adam kamoso all day long. I hear you. But I don't know about the neder. There's nothing. I didn't even know that it happened. I have no clue. The halo shmiale. You want to tell me that we're in the same room. If I'm over here and you're over there, and I hear my wife make the neder, and I tell you, just be made for the neder. So you say to the wife, mufar. Great. That's shluchos adam kamoso. But here, lo shmiale. Says the Gemara. Hachanami, top of Ayin Gimel Amarav. Hachanami do Amar le l'chishamana mefer le. When I hear about it, it'll be mufar. Similar as before. In other words, I have to come back into town. I have to hear about it, and then the shlichus works.
Yeah.
Says the Gemara. So then l'chishama lefer lahu. So let him do it himself. You're standing there. Your wife said neder. Tell the apotropos. Savar dilma matridna. He's so discombobulated. He looks, he like passes half of a hand to just let the apotropos know you need to be made for me. I can't even open my mouth. I'm so trashed, and that works too. So this is the flow of events. This one's much simpler than the other case. The shlichus is a 0 if the Baal doesn't know. The Baal has to come into town. He has to hear about the neder, and then yes, shluchos shel adam kamoso works. At least according to Rabbi Yonasan, because according to Rabbi Yoshia, we have the Gzer Sakasav. The Torah says Yishah Yekimenu Sheferenu.
Can the mother be a shliach?
That's regular rules of hafara.
Thus, does he hear me?
Could be.
Does anybody hear me?
Right here, pick up tomorrow with another 2 blot. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
Does anybody hear me?
So